One of these questions came when the guy pulled the question out and opened it up and read, "When I get married, if my wife is not able to have children, is it okay for me to get another wife?" And I looked at Starla in amazement for a second at this question. And everyone sitting there said, "Yeah, that's a good question. We want to know the answer to that." Now, that's very different than the way we would deal with it here in our society. You wouldn't hear that question asked. So it's a different way of thinking. But to this young man, if his wife couldn't have children, can he get another wife? Well, the guy, a very smart guy, said, whoever asked this question, I want to ask you this. How do you know it's not you that can't have the child? First of all, which was a radical thing to say in that society, to blame the man for the infertility problems. But he said, no, it's not okay. If you get married, infertility is not a valid reason for divorce. And they were all kind of puzzled by that because here was the Christian message encountering their social context and calling something that they all thought was right, wrong. When Hannah could not have a child, Hannah faced that same fear that many would face in Kenya, that her husband would get another wife. Her infertility is a horrible, horrible thing that people suffer silently with in this country sometimes. But can you imagine being in a culture, in a time where it's not just that you don't get a child, where you're not able to reproduce, but in addition to that, you have the very real fear of your husband going and getting another wife. And if your husband really doesn't want to have anything to do with you, just divorcing you, because you can't have children, not questioning his role in the process, whether biologically it's his fault or not, but being in a society where you really can be pushed to the side and forgotten about completely. You see how this is a little more difficult for Hannah than it was for Marlo. Now, Marlo had a painful experience of going to church on Mother's Day, as you heard her say, and sitting in the back with the men and the children. And it's important for us to hear that, because sometimes when we celebrate Mother's Day, it's easy for us to forget about those who have been unable to bear children. That's painful in and of itself, but so much more for Hannah with her husband going and getting another wife. Now, you have to give it to Elkanah. You may not want to, because it seems really harsh that he does go and marry another wife. But he loves Hannah. He loves Hannah. And for a moment, we got to give credit to this man who, in a society where it would have been really easy to push her aside, loves her and cares for her and gives her a double portion of what he gives to Peninnah. But you have to understand that the pain that Hannah experiences goes even deeper than that. Even deeper than not just being able to have a child. Even deeper than being in a situation where you can be forgotten and kicked out by society, where your very role as a woman comes under question, where you're seen as not really fully woman, where you're seen as not really fully human. Hannah's concern goes much deeper than that and is much more painful than that. See, what you have to understand is that for men, to be part of the Jewish faith, to be part of that church, so to speak, that what happened to them was on the 8th day when they were born, they were circumcised and they were brought into the faith, and that's what did it. And that was their identity as a man, not just as a man, but as a member of the Jewish faith. For a woman, her identity as a person of that faith was being able to bear children and being able to be part of that lineage of what God was doing. So for Hannah, this wasn't just having to experience Mother's Day year after year without a child. It wasn't just being questioned as whether she was fully woman or not. But for Hannah, it was she part of what God was doing here on earth? For Hannah, year after year, not having a child meant to her that God had abandoned her, that God had left her, that God didn't hear her, that not only was her prayer unanswered, but that she had no place in this faith. You're beginning to see Hannah's deep despair that she has. This is pain. No wonder when she goes into the temple, she looks like a drunk woman. Grief and tears. And you can just see Eli standing there watching as this woman is agonizing. But you got to remember, for her, she's not had a child. She's lost her identity as a woman in society. She's nothing to everybody. And in addition to that, even God doesn't care about her. Even God has abandoned her in her mind. That's become a reality for her. There's an old song that I wanted to share the lyrics to you with that put this in some more context. When Hannah, pressed with grief, poured forth her soul in prayer, she quickly found relief and left her burden there. Like her in every trying case, let us approach the throne of grace. When she began to pray, her heart was pained and sad, but ere she went away, was comforted and glad. In trouble, what a resting place have they who know the throne of grace. What's interesting about this story, and what I'm still thinking about, and I don't have the answer to this, and maybe you can share your thoughts with me afterwards, is what is it with Hannah that happens? That she walks into the temple, and year after year she's not had a child, and she goes in, and Eli the priest, even the religious leader, accuses her of being drunk. It makes her feel even more worthless as a human being. And yet, by the end of her time there, by the end of her pouring out her heart before God, as one person said, Hannah didn't have the words to pray, and sometimes it's better to have no words but to have a heart than it is to have words but no heart. So here was Hannah without words but with a heart before God, in real pain, in real agony. And yet somehow by the end of it, she was able to get up and eat and to drink. And I keep thinking about that. What was it that happened with Hannah as she was there at that altar or whatever it was that she was at, pouring out her heart before God? And the only thing I can think of, what gave me insight into this, is what this lady in this video said. And that was that Hannah began to see her infertility. Hannah changes her mind about God long before she gets pregnant, long before she gets the pink plus sign. Hannah changes her mind about God. Something God was doing inside of her that helped her to see, as this woman said in the video, that even the infertility was part of God's plan for her in her life. That God had not abandoned her when she felt like not being able to have a child surely meant, and even society was pointing fingers at her and saying, you're not part of what God's doing. God doesn't love you. And somehow, in some way, maybe through that bumbling priest that was there, that old guy that accused her of being drunk, saying, you're blessed, Hannah. Maybe he saw something in Hannah. Maybe he saw a heart open before God. Or maybe for Hannah it was just enough for a priest to say, hey, Hannah, daughter of God, you're not forgotten. Even in this pain, God is present in the midst of it. And even this, while you can't see it as part of God's plan, is God's plan for you in your life. Now, I don't want to shortchange all this, but I do find it interesting that after that, Hannah goes and she has a child, and she names her child Samuel. And in this video, the same thing happened to this woman. There she was, and that day the song was, My Jesus, if ever I love thee, my Jesus is now. We're going to sing that song in a second. My Jesus, if ever I love thee, even in this, even if you don't do this little thing that I wanted, God's saying to her, can you sing these words now? Even when the prayer hasn't been answered, can you sing these words now? We'll sing that in just a moment. But for Hannah and for this woman, it was the realization that this pain and this experience they were going through was part of what God, for some reason, was bringing them through. And that God didn't abandon them in it, but was with them in it. And somehow their prayers got answered after that. Now, I'm not saying that that's the secret to getting your prayers answered. The secret is not that if you come to a realization that, yeah, this is what God's doing in my life, that's going to somehow unleash God's power, and you're going to be able to have a child, or that disease or that sickness or that daughter or son that you have that you worry about, all of a sudden that's going to change. But it seems to me that sometimes the realization of it brings about the answer. Brings about the answer that God has not abandoned us. Again, as we sing this closing song today, I invite you, wherever you feel abandoned in your life by God, God's saying, can you sing it to me now? My Jesus, if ever I love thee, even now, even in the midst of this, Jesus, yes, I love you. So as we sing this today, I challenge you, can you sing the words? Can you mean it wherever you're at? Even in this, God, even in this, you haven't abandoned me, but you're with me. Let us stand and sing.